Welcome to Business Profit Acceleration Group Coaching. We have our special guest, Misty Elmore. Misty has been supporting businesses with human resource matters for over 24 years. Over 5 years ago, Misty founded Elmore HR Consulting to provide unmatched HR support to more businesses in California. The team at Elmore HR is driven by a passion to support employers with ever-evolving employment regulations. With over 40 years of combined in-house human resources, HR consulting, management experience, and nationally recognized HR certifications, California HR certification, and California HR law credentials, Elmore HR is ready to support your business. Misty has lived in Folsom, California since 1996, married her high school sweetheart, and has 2 boys. One graduated from Vista del Lago in December. Misty loves to go on new adventures, try new things, and be outdoors. I'll hand it over to you, Misty. Thank you so much for being our special guest.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you all. I'm excited to have an opportunity to talk about things that I love and often other business owners do not, which we recognize for sure. But hopefully we can touch on some key areas and give you some nice nuggets today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have some things I want to walk you through today, as well as some takeaways I'll be giving you after we're done here. So our goal today is to talk through some key parts and pieces related to all things employment, which, as I mentioned, are things I'm very passionate and excited about, but certainly recognize are the things that keep a lot of business owners up at night. Because we're going to talk about those topics, a lot of that is tied into regulatory topics, different laws and regulations. So, of course, I have to say I'm not an attorney, do not want to be an attorney, but we're going to talk about some of those legal matters today. So to dive in, of course, you know who I am now, and I'm with Elmore HR Consulting. We are based in Folsom, so right in your backyard. We do support businesses primarily throughout California. We have quite a few clients with locations or staff outside of the state of California. But with California being so dynamic, we will call it, with regards to employment requirements and regulations, we really try to stay focused in that arena because there's enough to digest for 1 million people there. Things we're going to cover today, topics we'll touch on, some key ones, obviously. As you know, employee versus independent contractor. That's been a very hot topic for quite some time, but more over the last couple of years with the introduction of some new regulations, primarily AB 5. And then we'll talk about different employee classifications and what that looks like as you start to consider hiring or grow your staff. There's some key parts and pieces you want to be aware of there. We'll talk about some tips and tricks regarding hiring. I know Jim always mentions you have to kiss a lot of frogs sometimes, but if we can give you some tips and tricks to avoid a few of those frogs and get the right hires out of the gate, we'll definitely want to do that. That is also the area where I have a nice takeaway that I will share with Jim when we're done so that you have that to refer to later. We'll talk about retention and recognition because once you find those amazing staff, you don't want to let them go. You want to hold on to them. You want to show the value that they bring. You want to show them the value that your business can offer to them. And we certainly want to recognize and reward. And then we'll wrap it up with talking about a couple of leadership tips and suggestions. And my goal is to have a good 15 minutes or so at the end so I can answer any burning HR questions that you may have brought today. I do want this to be more of a conversation as opposed to Misty throwing a lot of information your way. So if you do have a question on a particular topic, feel free, unmute, say, hey, have a question. I'll try and watch the chat a little bit here and there as well. But again, I want this to be more conversational. So if you're like, got it, moved on, you've said that 17 times, let me know that as well. So here's our first topic, a good old employee versus independent contractor. And I think it's important we kind of even step out of that and look at why do we even talk about this or what does this even mean? These are essentially legal designations. So an employee, as you can see, is someone who would receive a W-2 from our firm. They generally do work related to supporting our customers in some capacity or supporting the purpose of the business. So they're participating in some activity which is ultimately having a direct impact to benefiting our business. They work under our direction or our manager's direction. So whether that's dictating the timing of work, whether that's dictating how the work's being done, whether that's including us giving them the tools, information, and resources, giving them a schedule, they're really subject to the control of us as the employer in generally multiple capacities. They also have to log their time. So we're tracking how many hours they're working, what kind of jobs they're doing. We're making sure that they're complying with different requirements as far as meal breaks and rest periods, which we'll talk about more in a moment. But again, that ties back to being ultimately under our control as the employer. And if they're performing work that is related to work that others are doing, then likely they're going to be an employee as well. So, and I'll explain that a little bit more. An independent contractor, on the other hand, is someone who's the opposite of all of that. You guys are smart professionals. I'm not going to read that whole side to you, but ultimately you'll see it's the opposite. We're not giving them a lot of control. We're not having a lot of control over the work that they do. The work that they do generally would be outside of the scope of why our business exists. And so if you kind of think about it, as you're operating your business, you might need to hire someone to come in and do your marketing for you. Your business is not a marketing business, but you need a marketing expert. That person may qualify to be an independent contractor. You may need to bring someone in to navigate, set up, and maintain your IT. So if your business is not an IT firm, then that individual may need to come in and do that work for you. And in those capacities, you're not going to tell the marketing person, okay, here's the hours I need you to work. Here's the platforms I want you to use. Here's the softwares I expect you to utilize. You're essentially saying, hey, I need more clients. I want more clients of this particular avatar in this particular area. Make that happen. And they run off and they make that happen on whatever schedule they determine is appropriate, with using whatever systems they determine are appropriate, and they're acting in their own capacity. Couple other things to be mindful of are that under the laws, anyone doing any work for your business is presumed to be an employee out of the gate. So that's really important to know, because that means essentially we're an employer. And in order for them to be an independent contractor, they have to meet certain criteria. So that presumption exists that they're an employee until we can prove otherwise. So how do we prove otherwise? Likely, as a professional, you have been hearing about the ABC test for the last couple of years. I mentioned AB5. This was a big pivot with new regulations related to independent contractors. Where we have seen a big hit has been in fitness, where you have maybe a yoga instructor that historically would be an independent contractor. But now, because they are doing yoga work in a yoga studio or a fitness center, they are an employee. So we're seeing a lot of that. So these are the parts and pieces that must be satisfied in order for someone to be an independent contractor. So we're kind of doing an analysis. Now, as you can probably guess, this is kind of the opening statement for all of these parts. And then it's followed by a whole bunch of gobbledygook and definitions into how you back into satisfying that requirement. So I do want to read these to you because they will hopefully give some clarity, but know that there is a lot kind of embedded in each part and piece. And then I'm going to show you a resource where we can also do a little deeper dive if you feel the need. So part A of the ABC test for independent contractors asks, is the worker free from the control and direction of us as the hiring entity in the performance of the work, both under contract for the performance of the work and in fact. So that's important because oftentimes with an independent contractor, you will have an independent contractor agreement. And that agreement may say, do the work how you like, when you like. It may have all these fancy words and terms that help to align it with an independent contractor, but we have to look at what is actually happening. So if this independent contractor were to show up at our workspace, are we telling them on the daily, here's the schedule, here's what time you need to be here, here's how to do the work, here's who to call, here's what resources you need to use. And therefore, in fact, we are directing that control and having control of that position. So we have to look at that. How much control do we have? Part B, does the worker perform work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business? Those are the examples I gave earlier, right? Marketing and IT, if we're not a marketing and IT company. Then that would show that those positions, those tasks, those duties performed by that individual are outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. The other example I mentioned, such as a yoga instructor facilitating classes at a fitness center, that fitness center exists to perform and provide fitness-related information, tools, courses. So that yoga instructor would not be an independent contractor because essentially they're providing a benefit or resource that is in relation to the usual course of business. Then we have part C. Is the worker customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as the work performed by the hiring entity? So this is looking at, let's say you have a fitness center again, and you have someone who's a nutritionist, and you didn't really plan on having anyone as a nutritionist on staff, but you thought, oh, that might be a great benefit to also offer our members is maybe a monthly nutritionist course by a nutritionist. So that would end up potentially tying in to be still part of the reason that you are established as a business, and could again put into question, is that person an independent contractor or are they an employee? So you can see where that gets really muddy really quickly. And this has been an area where we've seen a lot of entities have to really pivot in the way that they work with certain individuals and bringing them on as employees as opposed to independent contractors. My best suggestion to you is if you are considering hiring someone to add value to your business, and they will be performing any type of work that is going to ultimately provide a benefit to your client base, then they're likely going to be an employee. If you're bringing someone on to perform some activities, some work, some projects that is going to advance your business in the way you operate, then it may be an independent contractor because they're benefiting kind of the ongoings of the business, not why you exist as a business to support your customers. So hopefully that can provide a little bit of clarity. But again, don't lose sight of the fact that under the law, it's presumed anyone doing work for our business is an employee, unless and until we can dissect these parts A, B, and C and prove otherwise. So I want to show you something real quick. That's this link on the bottom here. And again, I'll share this with Jim so he can pass this along. Hopefully you'll see your screen bounce around a little bit here. I did a screen share, so I may have to stop and share this as well. Are you guys looking at a web page or are you still looking at the presentation? Okay, let me stop that and I'm going to restart so you can see my screen. Okay, so now you should be looking at a web page that says labor and workforce. Do you see that?
Yes.
Fabulous. So what this is it's a fancy schmancy website that California came up with that is specific and dedicated to helping businesses and workers determine if they're an independent contractor or an employee. So again, I'll share this link with Jim so he can pass it along. But if you can't sleep and this is one of those things running around in your mind, this will do the trick and put you right to sleep, I promise you. So what you can do is come into here and say, I'm thinking about hiring someone. I want to know more about that ABC test. And again, as I shared, you'll see the parts that we mentioned and then more information related to each of those. Or you might say, I just want to know more about this whole thing. And what do I need to know as an employer? So you can come into the employer resources. There's a lot of FAQs. What exactly is this AB5 thing? What is the ABC test that is part of AB5? Some penalties, which we'll talk about in a moment, because you can never have an HR person in front of you without talking about penalties. Unfortunately, that's the way we roll. So you'll see a lot of kind of information here and resources about the independent contractor piece. So just wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up that link will be passed along to you afterwards if you have more information. I think also of note is that this is intended to also be for a worker. So if an employee thinks that they're misclassified as an independent contractor, the state has made same and similar information available to them as well. And I always like to point that out because it's fairly easy for someone to find some resources and feel that they were potentially misclassified. All right, let's go back to our presentation here. So another part and piece of the ABC test, everyone kind of goes, yeah, so what does that mean? What do I have to look at? What do I have to consider? So what we're seeing on this particular slide are those so whats. What does this mean? So a few things I want to point out, and that is, of course, penalties. What happens if someone is misclassified? So when someone's an independent contractor, it means exactly that. They're not an employee. They don't have workers' compensation coverage. They're not complying with wage and hour regulations, such as overtime payments, rest breaks, meal breaks, all those kinds of things. So all of that is off the table. So that means if someone was misclassified, we've now violated all of the things, right? We didn't give them rest breaks. We didn't give them overtime. We didn't give them maybe premium pay. We didn't give them reporting time pay. So all those things that go along with having an employee aren't in play. What happens if they get injured? Oh my goodness, they're not covered under workers' comp potentially. And you may hear that sometimes. We are seeing more and more workers' compensation carriers dive into, do you have independent contractors, and maybe do they need to be covered? So there could be some penalties there. Additionally, you see some civil penalties between $5,000 and $25,000. That's generally related to willful misclassification. So if they can demonstrate, and they would be obviously EDD or any litigation that's going on, could demonstrate that the intention was there to purposefully misclassify and therefore not provide those employee benefits to the independent contractor, then those civil penalties would come into play. I will tell you, penalties for misclassification, meaning meal periods, not paying overtime, maybe not paying minimum wage, not paying all these other things, are going to be much, much higher than that $5,000 to $25,000. Those adds up extremely quickly. And you'll see some of the things I mentioned in that second paragraph down below. So likely, as y'all know, when you do have an employee, those items in blue that I mentioned must be provided and complied with. And so simply as an independent contractor, they don't get those things. And that's where they can go to the labor commissioner, file a claim saying I was misclassified, didn't get my meal breaks, didn't get my rest breaks, didn't get overtime, everything else that goes along with that. And then we're off to the races, unfortunately, with that one. Then we have taxes. So a piece I always like to mention when we're looking at independent contractor versus employee is yes, you have these civil penalties. Yes, you have the penalties for things that we didn't provide them if they were in fact an employee. Additionally, there's a tax issue because as an independent contractor, you likely know you're not collecting taxes and making tax payments on behalf of that individual, nor are you paying or matching the employer tax. So what happens if someone's misclassified? The employer can be on the hook to, of course, pay any taxes that they should have paid as an employer, but they also can be on the hook to pay what that independent contractor should have paid if they were an employee. So you get a bit of a double whammy potentially under the taxes part, which can be pretty costly. So again, another thing to consider under potential violations. Okay, hopefully I didn't scare you to death with that one, but there is a lot there, you guys, and I would just say if you're ever considering bringing someone on and the thought is, could they be an independent contractor? Just remember, per law, they're going to be considered an employee out of the gate until you can prove otherwise. I know some of you are looking forward to hiring someone to kind of offload some of your administrivia items, start to get some support with those daily things that you're handling, more of that maybe energy vampire work, if you will, to kind of offload some of that. Some suggestions I can give you if you are looking for something in that capacity and you're willing to consider maybe a virtual assistant type of a relationship. You may want to use a firm, to go through and provide that resource. If that's what they do as a business, they provide virtual assistant work, and that firm will help you identify the right person for your work. Then you could operate maybe in that capacity more like an independent contractor, because at that point, you're contracting with a company that exists to provide those virtual assistants for you. So that might be an option. I would not suggest that you put an ad out on Folsom Chat and say, I'm looking for someone to help me with my administrivia work, and put a whole listing and then hire them directly as an independent contractor. That would be different. So again, just something to think about if you're just dipping the toe in getting some help and want to see how it goes. We've actually had quite a bit of clients have success with hiring virtual assistants through companies that exist to provide those type of services. Okay, so let's look at the other side of the coin on employee classification. So once we hire someone in, we've determined that they are an employee, then we have to classify them further as an employee. How are they classified? So you'll see a couple of the key ones here: full-time, part-time. The next slide, you'll see temporary in a moment. Ultimately, for most purposes, an employer gets to determine how a full-time employee is defined. So you could say a full-time employee is someone who works at least 32 hours per week. You could say a full-time employee is someone who works at least 40 hours a week. You could say a full-time employee is someone who works more than 20 hours a week. You have a lot of flex with defining full-time and part-time for your operational purposes. There are some specific areas where that is defined for us. One of those is going to be health insurance. Probably not a huge deal right now if you're not offering health insurance, but down the road, if that starts to become a consideration, then that number of hours is 30, and that's defined for us. So anyone working 30 hours or more would be eligible for health benefits under our plan. And that's part of the whole Affordable Care Act and all those kinds of things that have come out years ago. But for other things such as holiday pay or vacation pay, you get to define who's a full-time employee and may be eligible for those kinds of things. Also important to note, in California, once you hire that first employee, we need to think about mandated benefits. California has paid sick leave, and that is required when you have just one employee. And that requires us to provide paid sick leave either on an accrual basis of 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, or on a front load basis where we give them 3 days, either 24 hours or 3 days, whichever is greater for their schedule, up front. And there's some benefits to doing it different ways that we work each client through. So that's important to note because, again, if we can call them part-time, but if they're working at all, then they're going to be eligible for those paid sick leave benefits. Also, you've likely heard the term temporary employee. Something I like to touch on there. A temporary employee, guys, is just that. It's someone to work for a particular project, a particular duration of time, maybe covering an employee who went out on a leave. Generally, a temporary employee is going to work for you for about 6 months. If you start to go too much beyond that, then there becomes some argument of this really wasn't temporary. So couple of things when you're bringing someone on, you want to make sure that they're very clear on what their classification is. So you want to make sure that we've told them, are they full-time? Are they part-time? And then we also have to define, are they exempt or are they non-exempt? So some of you may have heard those. Essentially, exempt and non-exempt are a classification of an employee. And then hourly or salary is a method of pay. So generally we see an exempt salary paid employee and a non-exempt hourly paid employee. A little trick to remember the difference is the exempt and non-exempt ties back to a document called the wage order in California. And the wage order defines for each business, there are 17 different versions of that. But it defines for each business how they pay and calculate overtime, how they have to offer meal periods, how they have to offer rest breaks. It's about 12 pages of size 4 font of all the basic wage and hour regulations. And an individual who's classified as exempt is exempt from that wage order, meaning they don't have to take meal breaks, they don't have to take rest breaks, they don't have to be paid overtime. A non-exempt employee is not exempt from that wage order, and therefore they do get overtime, they do get meal breaks, they do get rest breaks, and everything else that's defined in that document. How we generally define that for an employee on the front end is a few ways. We like to see our clients offer or provide offer letters that we help them prepare. And so that would be defined as part of the offer before the individual accepts. And we would define them again as full-time, part-time, exempt, or non-exempt. And then we'd also clarify any contingencies you had. So if you were going to do a background check for criminal history, any type of contingency that you may have would be defined there. And then anytime throughout the duration of employment that any of that data changes, pay rate, schedule, things of that nature, the labor code requires that employees be informed within 7 days. And there's a specific form that we do that with, which I'll pull up and show you just for fun. It is called the Wage Theft Protection Act Notice, and it looks like this. So this is something that all new hires must receive when they come to work for you. It obviously has their information, name and start date, information about the entity, and this is the legal information, so legal name, which may be different than a DBA, address, etc. And then here's their wage data. So this was introduced in about 2012 in regards to making sure there was wage transparency. So we have to tell all new hires, which are non-exempt, what their pay rate is. And then anytime that data changes, we need to tell them in writing again within 7 days. This form also captures your workers' compensation information, how you're going to provide the paid sick leave. And then you'll see on the bottom, which a lot of employers overlook, but it does remind us that if there are any changes, then the employer must inform us in writing within 7 calendar days. So you could do that by utilizing this form or another data change form or some other written method to have that in writing. Plus, we're HR. We always like signatures anyhow. So you would want an employee to sign saying that they acknowledge their pay rate's changing or their schedule's changing or their work location is changing. So, all right, let's bounce back to our presentation here. Sorry for the screen bouncing, but I want to make sure I'm showing you guys as much as I can.
Misty, what was that form called again?
That is it's called the Wage Theft Protection Act Notice. And I can send you a copy of that as well.
Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about getting these employees, right? We've talked about a little bit of classifications and what that looks like, but how in the world do we find that right employee? That's the magic question, especially these days. It is hard to find good employees these days. It's a little bit hard to find people who even want to work these days, if I'm being honest. We have seen a significant challenge across all industries that we support, just being able to get a good applicant flow. So there's some tricks that we have and some things we're doing to try and increase that for all of our clients. So a couple things in regards to recruiting is don't get stuck, right? Don't be stuck just posting on Indeed and hope that your unicorn's going to walk through the Indeed door and apply for your position that way. You've got to really diversify and put a lot of job postings out there. So whether that's on Instagram, Facebook, all the above, really make sure you're broadcasting your need so that you can have a good, strong applicant pool. When you're doing that, you want to make sure that you're identifying the qualities that you're looking for. And you want to define this for you, right? Oftentimes I find, and guilty myself as a business owner, when I was looking for my first employee to onboard in Elmore HR, I thought, I got this. I've been talking about HR for 20 years. Like, well, I figure this out. And then I was like, holy smokes, this is a totally different ballgame when I'm doing this for myself. So it was actually a great experience to walk through. But we have to know what we're looking for. So really take inventory and think about, what is this candidate going to do for you? What do you want them to do for you? What does that look like? And I know it says job description there, which sounds like this fancy schmancy document, but just get it down. Even if you're, doing it on your phone in the notes or whatever it may work for you, get the key parts and pieces down of what you're looking for. You can always formalize it a little bit later. But to have that before you go out and broadcast your job posting is going to be really important. Then when you start to get the job posting together, remember, you're marketing yourself. You're selling yourself and your business to the world just as much as an applicant's trying to sell themselves to you. So make it attractive, make it fun. We often will start our job postings with something like, are you full of energy and like to help businesses do whatever? Are you looking for a position where you can make a difference? Are you, and then we say, we're looking for you. So trying to make it kind of fun, engaging, and remember, if you're just going to go in and bullet point what you're looking for, you're going to get lost in the mix of all the other job postings out there. So really market yourself, market your business, make it fun, make it stand out. Also remember, your job postings are going to come up if your clients are looking for help or looking for you. Everything's online these days. So also write that as if, someone was looking to utilize your services, they may see that job posting too. Once you start to get applicants coming in, don't fall into the trap of comparing candidates to each other. That often is what we do as humans. We start to see these things coming in and we're like, oh, that one has less experience than that one. Oh, that one doesn't match the other. But keep going back to those bullet points of what you're looking for. Compare the candidates to the job that you are hiring for, not to each other. Then you're going to do your typical process of your no pile, your yes pile maybe, or, however you're tracking that. And then definitely make sure that we're following some certain steps. I'm hesitating because I have a tool I want to share you, and I don't want to talk about it and then back into it. But ultimately, just make sure the job posting is attracting candidates. I'd strongly encourage you to set up a separate email. Maybe it's jobs at your business name or careers at your business name. So you're having a separate email where all applications are being filtered so that you're not going to get bombarded, and you're going to get marketing junk too. So keep your inbox clean. I know that that's always a stress factor when our inbox number is going up. So if you have a designated inbox for applicants and candidates, you can kind of separate those parts and pieces. In your job posting, as I said, make it attractive, talk about your company culture, talk about the benefits of working for you. The candidates are looking for and choosing where they want to invest their time. So why would they choose you over the next job posting they look at is going to be important to really make that stand out. Then you're going to start to interview. So once you've gone through and compared your candidates to the job that you're hiring for, you have those that satisfied that basic criteria, then you're going to start to interview. Huge fan of telephone interviews. I think especially if you're going to have any of your employees on the phone, you want to pre-screen them on the phone for sure, for a few reasons. One, people can come across very different on the phone than they do in person. So if they're going to be on the phone, you want to know how they come across on that phone call. Secondly, and maybe this is selfishly, but sometimes I get that voicemail where it's like some crazy song and they're like, don't leave me a message because I don't check my inbox. I'm like, well, do I want to work with someone that doesn't even check their own personal inbox? I don't know. So sometimes you can get some interesting information by calling and having those phone screenings. So what you should be looking at now on the screen is a tool that we have made for clients. Now, this is all customized for each client. So you'll notice Rancho Cordova and some start times and things because we create these custom for each of our clients. But this is a telephone screen worksheet that I encourage you to create something similar to this. With a telephone screen, you are asking some basic information. You're not going to call them and say, let me tell you what I'm looking for, because then what happens? They spit it all right back to you. So my biggest tip and our biggest suggestion to clients is keep some secrets, right? Don't disclose what you're looking for. Don't disclose a lot about your company until the very end of the interview process, which I'm going to share with you. So for the telephone screen, you're just asking basic information. How'd you hear about us? Why did you apply? Can you work at this location? If there's any certifications that are required, do you have a current and valid certification? If they need to drive, do you have a valid driver's license? There are things you cannot ask in an interview. So you'll see certain things here, and I'm going to show you a suggestion, but you cannot ask what they're currently making as pay. Salary came off the table of things we can ask a couple years ago. So that's why you'll see this question, what is your desired rate of pay? We can ask that. And then ask them, what are you looking for in your next employer? Right? They may be looking for something you can't offer, and you would rather know that out of the gate. This is an important relationship, and so we need to be on the same page. So telephone screen, as you can see, very basic, kind of those qualifier questions, should be maybe 15 minutes. It doesn't take a lot of time, but you guys know if you sit down to talk to someone, you know in the first 20 seconds if they're going to be a fit or if you even want to continue on. So it can save you a lot of time by doing a phone screen to get that basic information. Then if they qualify and you feel that that went well, you may go ahead and schedule that in-person interview and get that on the books. When they come in for their in-person interview, same gig, guys. You want to have questions ready to go. And this, again, another customized sample we did with a client. But you want to have some very specific questions that you ask them. And we are really big on behavior-based interviewing. We tell our clients, oftentimes we say, you can train skills, but you can't untrain an asshole to be not an asshole. It just works that way. So we think it's really important to get that right behavior fit in, someone who's going to work with you. And so you'll see, again, some basic questions here. And then we get into some specifics. So when someone comes in to interview, again, I'll mention this again because I think it's important. Do not tell them out of the gate everything about the position and everything about the company. Just tell them, thanks for coming in. Let me tell you what to expect. I'm going to ask you some questions. Then I'll tell you about the position in the company. And then I'll give you an opportunity to ask some questions and get to it. Get right to your questions. Go down the list. You're going to ask them things like, what type of manager do you like to work for? Well, guess what? If you followed my rule, you haven't told them about the company. You haven't told them what you're looking for. They don't know what kind of manager they're going to work for. So if they say, I like a manager to tell me what to do and leave me alone, and you're a micromanager, ain't going to work out. So you want to make sure that you're asking these types of questions before you give them data. Then you also want to get into some of those behavior indicators, right? So that's situational questions. Put them in the job. You know, what would you do if you walked up to take an order at a table and the person was very angry and obviously was very upset out of the gate? How would you handle that? Or you see some of the ones here. You're completing an install when a customer requests a last minute change. How do you respond? You want to find out not just how they would respond, which is what the question seems to be, but what is their thought process to get to why they would respond that way. So put them in the role, ask them situational questions, and ask them information about how they would respond and react. If you're ever stuck, just start with, tell me about a time when, right? Tell me about a time when you failed at meeting a deadline. How'd you handle that? Tell me about a time when you had a difficult situation with a customer. Then you want to get into a couple of the other questions. Always ask them, what do they know about your business? Why do they want to work for you? A good candidate who is invested in working with you is going to have Googled your company and they can spit some stuff back to you. A candidate which is not invested from the get-go and at least hasn't Googled your business of where they're going to interview, they're going to be the same on the job, right? They're not going to take that time to investigate. They're not going to take time to look into things. You want a candidate to know about your business without you having told them. Then you're going to confirm some of the data you captured maybe from the phone interview, just to reiterate any key parts and pieces. After you've asked these questions, you guys, this is when you say, great, so let me tell you a little bit about our position and our company. And then, and only then, do you tell them that information. If you tell them on the front end, you're not going to get any insight into kind of how they would behave on the job. So I do have this takeaway, which I will share and send to Jim, and he can send out to all of you. It's our interview quick reference guide. So it walks through in more detail than we have time to cover today. Just those tips and tricks and suggestions. It tells you what you can ask and what you cannot ask. Probably not surprising, knowing that we're in California. The list of what we cannot ask is much longer than what we can ask. So you'll see that there, as well as some of those tips that I mentioned with conducting the interview, how to greet them, what that agenda should look like. And then afterwards, kind of some follow-up items with afterwards for that interview. You guys, if there's any time that you really pause and spend a lot of time on your business, it's in this hiring process, because you would much rather spend more time on the front end to get that right candidate than trying to exit someone or turn their performance around. Once you hire someone in California, whether they work with you for 1 hour or 1 decade, they have all the same legal rights. This thing called an introductory period does not limit or reduce any rights that the employee has. It really is a period for them to be under the microscope and us be addressing that time. So very hard in California to exit an employee. So take your time, invest that time on the front end. Some reminders, and again, I told you I was going to kind of walk through some of this before the presentation slide came up, but you'll see that a lot of those points that I mentioned, you want to have offer letters ready. You want to know what your game plan is. There are a variety of required documents in California when you hire. And then make sure you have a plan. So when you're onboarding that person, you know, is their desk ready? Is their laptop set up? Do you have any company swag? Do they know what their schedule is going to look like? Really just have that structure and plan, because you're going to be winging it if not. And then it makes us as the hiring entity look disheveled or unorganized, and kind of sets the employee out of the gate like, oh boy, what did I get myself into, right? So I'm here to tell you, behind the curtain of every business, and especially business owner, we're crazy, right? As a business owner, we're doing like 5,000 times things every 15 minutes. So we're unorganized. We have a lot going on. It's just the way we are, but we've got to make sure, especially when we're bringing someone in to help us out, we have a good strategy and a good plan. Turnover and why we want to keep those individuals. You probably heard many different kind of numbers, but the cost to replace someone is anywhere from 1.5 to 2 times their annual salary or annual earnings. It's very expensive. The time, the energy, and then of course the hard costs add up quite quickly. So we want to make sure you're, again, taking that time on the front end to get that right candidate. But then also we're keeping that right candidate committed to, dedicated to, and working hard for us. So we want to make sure we're retaining them in the best way that we can. Some suggestions for doing that. And again, you guys are all smart professionals and could come up with a similar list. But I will tell you, oftentimes businesses think that employees just want more pay. There are oodles of studies that show that is not true. Employees actually would prefer to hear a thank you, and I appreciate that. And we recognize that you took great care of that client, and they will stay around longer for those things than they will, a 50-cent raise. So very important, especially as the workplace is changing and the demographics of the workplace are changing. That we recognize retention of our employees is not just throwing money around. It is pausing to say thank you. It is picking up the phone to say, how are you? It is saying, thanks for taking great care of that. So it's just recognizing all those things that our employees do. We also have a lot of suggestions. Every employee is different. Some want you to get on the rooftop and tell the whole town that they're the best employee that ever existed. And some would run and hide if we even thought about doing that. So we always suggest asking employees as part of the onboarding process, how do you like to be recognized? What do you need from me as your employer? And kind of get into those questions so you have some transparency and information both ways. Leadership, a couple things I wanted to touch on here. Again, you guys are all smart professionals. We know the difference between a leader and a manager. This is just always a nice summary that I've liked from the Center for Creative Leadership. It just reminds us as a leader why we are in the role and the areas we should be focusing on with those 6 key points there. And then things that we suggest with our managers and leaders with our businesses are kind of those checkbox items you see. So we always suggest quarterly check-ins with every employee. Not a full performance review, you guys. We literally say ask 2 questions. Sit down once a quarter and ask, hey, what went really well for you this quarter? Have that combo, see what's going on. And then ask, what did you struggle with this quarter? What was challenging this quarter? And that does a few things. One, it gives you insight into what are your staff enjoying, especially if you have multiple staff and you hear kind of the repeated or patterns. You can recognize that and enhance those areas. And then you also have an awareness as to what isn't going so well. So you have an opportunity to make some adjustments and pivot and change things to get things back on track. So those are quick, quarterly check-ins, usually about 15 minutes per employee, in addition to a formal performance review. We suggest getting in the trenches with your employees. So get on the phone. If your employees are making phone calls to customers, hey, don't lose touch with that. If you sit down and take a couple phone calls or at least listen in, see what's going on, see what their life is like, get out there and do the work with them. Be seen, don't hide in your office, because look, everybody knows as a business owner, we could hide in our office for years on end and never get out. So get out of your office, be seen, know what's going on. Delegate, and not just delegate the things that you think you should delegate, but delegate things that are going to push your employees, right? If you're sitting in your office going, oh, I need to find an IT person or I need to find a marketing person, and your employees doing administrative work, say, hey, you know what? I have not been able to find time to locate an IT company. Here's what I need them to do. Would you mind taking that off my plate? That'd be super helpful. Employees want to add value to you, not just to your business. So if they feel that they're helping you and you're trusting them with things related to the business, that can help boost them up and feel more sticky as an employee as well. Ask for that feedback. Beware of the whole employee. These are people working for us. These are people with real life challenges. These are people with real life families outside of our world. So, especially in today's world where the workplace is changing, we're encouraging managers to reach out to their staff every other Friday and just say, hey, how are you? Not, hey, how are you? Is that deadline done? Hey, how'd that project go? Hey, how's that customer? The whole purpose of that call is, hey, how are you? And just kind of chat and see how they're doing and end the call without talking about any work-related stuff, unless, of course, the employee has that need. And then there's the self, right? Be aware of ourself. Before you know it, your staff are going to be little reflections of you. If we're frustrated and angry, guess what? The whole crew is going to be frustrated and angry. If we're short, the whole crew is going to be short. So just be aware of yourself. You set the tone, especially with those first few hires. You set the expectation. And then I'd encourage you to never stop learning, right? About your industry, about business, about whether you go out and do any type of personality profiles and share those with your team. There's a lot of things we can do out there to always work and always learn as leaders.